G'day folks, and welcome to another episode of Encounters Down Under. Joining us on the show is someone not everyone will know unless you are serious when it comes to the field of UFOs. The man I speak of is none other than Paul Dean, who is a renowned Australian UFO researcher that has been attacking not only Australia, but even the American government and military for the past 20 odd years, trying to obtain information they have on the UFO phenomena. So Paul joins us on the show to tell us about his life as a researcher and explain some of the difficulties he's had, as well as the knowledge he's obtained over the years. So please give a warm welcome, Mr. Paul Dean. All yours, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Okay, thanks heaps for that. I look. Some people know my work pretty well, and a lot of people don't at all. One reason might be because what I do is essentially a lot of it is very boring. A lot of it's very, very dry, technical, historical. There's nothing particularly conspiratorial or someone once used the word sexy in what I do as far as the history of the UFO matter entails. I do some really work at the coalface, analysing weather data and studying how pilots talk to each other over radio systems when they're describing something that they're seeing in the sky, or we're trying to work out who signed something on a almost illegible document from a government archive from the 50s.
Yeah,
that's a lot of the sort of work I do.
Yeah, wow. So there'd be a lot to it then. So a lot of back and forth, sort of, trying to get the information to choosing the right words and such, maybe kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything. When you go to a state library or a national library or a university library, and you start looking for old books that haven't been assessed or studied by UFO researchers or even just general aerospace physicists or meteorologists or historians, like when you're looking for old books or booklets or magazines that haven't been assessed or looked at from the 40s, or when you're looking for particular thesis dissertations on radar systems or meteorological phenomena or whatever, you have to be very, very specific. And it's the same thing dealing with the government. When you're dealing directly with ministers, or the Chief of Air, who's the head of our Air Force, or the Chief of Navy, who's the head of our Naval Command, or dealing with, say, the lawyers at the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, you have to have done your research first. You have to know their terminology, not yours, theirs. You can't be flinging the word UFO around. You certainly can't be flinging the word flying saucer around. You can't be flinging anything to do with aliens around. Whatever, you've got to be using their language. Accident, incident, notification is a better term for UFO sighting. If you know what I mean.
Okay.
Within Air Services Australia, that's the organisation that run our airports, that license airports, that run our navigational and radar systems. With them, you can't just say to them, look, I want copies of every UFO you've had in the last 5 years, every UFO report you've had in the last 5 years from pilots over Australia. They want to know. Okay, so using our what system do you think pilots use with Air Services Australia with us, and you've got to say, well, I know that they report on your electronically submitted event report system. They report words like unknown traffic or unknown object, and then they say, now we know what you're talking about. Yeah, we'll go and fetch the information. Wait 2 months. So this is the sort of work I do, and it can be very, very dry. You need a lot of patience. You need to be dealing with a lot of bureaucracy. A lot of legal jargon, and some of there's some very significant barriers in what I do.
Yeah, wow.
That I've thrown up. Yeah.
So what actually got you started into doing this sort of stuff? Like, did you have an experience for yourself, or did you just find an interest in it and go, I want to find out more about this?
No, what I did, I've never seen a damn thing. Never seen a damn thing.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know. I sort of wonder now if it's even worth it. It's like I've got my head stuck in the bookwork anyway, not looking up, and it's just funny. But there's 2 things that got me started.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm in Melbourne, and one of the world, or certainly up until recently, we'll say one of the world's most famous UFO cases was an infamous event called the Frederick Village Affair, and it happened in October 1978, tad before I was born.
Yep.
And what actually happened was a 21-year-old pilot by the name of Frederick Valenti took off from a suburban airport in Melbourne. He flew south. His plan or his flight plan was to simply fly south at sunset, pick up crayfish on King Island, which is near Tasmania, and fly back before night's end, and just a routine night flight, single engine or single propeller, single engine Cessna, with him as the single pilot on board, no other crew, no one else. And what actually happened was he never made it. He simply never made it to his destination. But what was interesting was this: the final 13 minutes of his journey, he was in constant radio communication with Tullamarine Airport in Melbourne. And his discussion with them, it'll make your hair, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, it'll make your hair stand on end. For those that do know what I'm talking about, they'll know what I'm talking about. Now, that incident, basically he described an object, or objects, probably one object, encircling, harassing his aircraft. He tried to shake it. He went in orbital circles around to try and shake it. He described it as shiny and metallic, blah, blah, blah. Then he vanished. Right, now, this event happened a bit before I was born, but it regularly, as I was growing up, it was, featured on a current affair or Today Tonight or one of those shows, or it was in magazines, or it was occasionally featured in newspaper articles. The 10th anniversary of Frederick Valenti's disappearance, and it was the 15th anniversary of Frederick Valenti's disappearance, and then, new so-called new evidence is coming out, whatever, and this would just keep playing out in the media. And of course, growing up, you'd think, well, what is all this about? Like, and my mum or my family or friends or whatever would say, oh, it's that pilot that saw a UFO and he vanished. And so that's one thing that got me interested. But the other thing that got me interested is that my father, who was actually in the Army, he was in the Australian Army in Victoria, and he was in mapping and cartography, but he was driving between Sydney and Melbourne, and he had his own sighting, unfortunately by himself, so it's what we call a single witness case. Happened in the middle of the night, so not great, but it was a very, very provocative sighting, and my father's a very technical guy, like a pretty scientific guy. He's certainly not open to flights of fancy. He doesn't drink and drive. He's got perfect eyesight, all that. And he had a really confounding, perplexing experience that was fairly close range and scared the living daylights out of him. So those two, so we grew up, I grew up with him occasionally recounting this story, and those are the two things that got me stuck into the books. And, the first thing I realised once I got stuck into the books, I mean, when you're a child going to the library, you're going to find books on unsolved mysteries, and you're going to find books on strange places and strange happenings and ghosts and whatever else. And it became apparent to me pretty quickly that a lot of this stuff was garbage, or at best it was anecdotal and circumstantial. I mean, werewolves, Atlantis, vampires, whatever.
Folklore sort of stories.
Folklore, legend, mythological stories, strange places that may in fact not be that strange at all. And conspiracies that have been easily superseded now, long superseded. But the UFO mystery stood out as being something quite unique because it had one, ongoing governmental and military interest. Two, it just was not going away. I mean, things like vampires, they've long gone. Werewolves, whatever. Yeah,
it's kept as a bedtime story, basically.
Exactly, but the UFO mystery just keeps piling on and piling on. There's a level of secrecy, there's a level of document classification, there's a level of government concern. It's worldwide. Like the phenomena, whatever it constitutes, does appear to be completely worldwide, and it's very historical. And there's so much material on it. There is so many old newspaper articles and old book extracts you can read from the day books were first printed, where people have been, right back to theological and clergy records, town mayor records, just the amount of cave paintings, the amount of historical material, not to mention everything that's been printed in government dossiers and typewritten letters between scientists and everything else, from the 40s onwards. The amount of material out there to engage with and read is insurmountable. It's unbelievable how much material. I mean, right now, if you include books on on strange, like SETI, or if you include books on, say, weather anomalies and so on, we've got 3,500 books on UFOs.
Holy jeez.
Yeah, we do. There's 3,500 books have been printed on UFOs, and then it would have to be another 9,000 or 10,000 that at least mention UFOs. It might be, a children's book on unsolved mysteries or whatever. And we've actually, to actually go through this stuff is completely, you couldn't do it in a whole lifetime. I mean, the number of magazines that over the years, newsletters and magazines and journals and periodicals that have been devoted just to UFOs alone is just beyond the pale. You could fill rooms and rooms and rooms of it. It is so much material, it's not funny. Nothing else, none of the other mysteries, maybe with the exception of the real big hitting things like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, something like that.
Yep.
Nothing else, no other mysteries come even close to the amount of resource material we've actually got.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So how do you actually come about to go and sort of look down the path of this sort of thing?
Okay, so I found that I studied the great scholarly works, the great foundational scholarly works of ufology from the 70s and 80s, all really late 60s, 70s and 80s. So those are books by the astronomer Joseph Allen Hynek, the atmospheric physicist James Lee McDonald, or he didn't publish books, but he published monographs and papers. The great authors like Amy Michelle and Dick Hall, and even the skeptical authors like Phil Clash. You've got to read skeptical stuff too.
Yeah.
I studied the really technical stuff, and a few things jumped out at me early on. I realised that the very agencies, the very government agencies and government military commands that should be, by rights, should be on the forefront of UFO, whatever UFOs are, and also mean stray missiles, unidentified or secret aircraft, whatever. Basically anything in the sky. I realised that in America and Australia, and to a lesser extent in England, I realised that the very government agencies that were tasked with understanding what was in the skies and in space were the very agencies, unfortunately, that were being overlooked by ufologists. So for really since the 70s, the vast number of UFO researchers have been focusing on the intelligence community in America, so the CIA,
yep,
the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to a lesser extent the National Security Agency, NSA. They've been focusing on old army records. They've been focusing on like university laboratories. They've been whatever. But the very agencies that they should have been focusing on, like NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or the United States Air Force Space Command, those two agencies particularly have barely been touched as far as UFOs go. So basically I realised that the best data, the best information, the best pictorials, the best radar data, the best opinion pieces and classified statements and logs and whatever else, the best material will be held by this small handful in America, this small handful of organisations that UFO researchers have either found it too hard to engage with, or have just simply completely missed them. And so I started really studying how Air Force Space Command and Navy Space Command and Army Space Command and NORAD, I started studying how they worked, how they detected things in space and in the atmosphere, how they logged events in space and atmosphere, how pilots talk to each other when they're flying under the auspices of NORAD, and so on. And I started writing about it, and what few declassified documents we do actually have, or have had in the past, I brought them back to life, and I brought them into the light, and we're talking old unit history documents and sighting reports from pilots, and basically almost like indexes and lists of the number of unknown objects that have been picked up at individual radar stations around the coast of the United States and stuff like this. This material had either never been seen before or it hadn't been seen for a very long time. So, and I realised that while everyone else is whinging about NASA and griping about the CIA and griping about, the president and griping about, like secret laboratories and whatever else, I realised that some of the best material is right under people's noses and no one's ever done anything about it. Or
Yeah,
look for
wow.
them entirely.
That is incredible. That is absolutely amazing. Like how much detail has been lost and overlooked, like you're saying. Jeez. So like how long do you think that took you to try and like overcome all that sort of information to actually get that back?
Years. I mean, just to even study how an organisation like the North American Aerospace Defence Command actually works. By the way, for those who don't know, NORAD is responsible for America and Canada's military air sovereignty and military aerospace surveillance. So basically, NORAD at any one time should and must know everything in the atmosphere above America and Canada, above 500 feet. So sure, they're not going to know little tiny planes that are going from one little airport to another, but basically anything higher than that, NORAD have in their have on their screens. It is almost like in the movies, and it took me years to figure out where all the NORAD bases are and what you have to do to work at NORAD and how they actually log sightings. Like for example, when they pick up something on radar that should not be there, like it hasn't filed a flight plan, it hasn't got any radio transmission coming from it, it won't identify itself, it's doing loop-de-loops in the sky or whatever, that's immediately with the radar system, it's called an unknown track. And it's all UT, unknown track. So I had to learn all this. I had to learn, how many unknown tracks they were picking up every year, how many of those unknown tracks were going away from the United States or Canada, how many were actually over the United States or Canada, how many turned out to be hijacked aircraft, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this took years and years of reading. And Space Command was even harder. I mean, one thing we've found out is that the United States Air Force's Space Command has this squadron that runs 4, they're called ground electro-optical surveillance system telescopes. And what they are, they're these massive telescopes. There's one in New Mexico, one in Hawaii, one in Spain, and one in Korea. And they look up into, or as long as it's not cloudy, they look up into space, and they cut this massive swathe of they look straight up, and they look at a big, huge portion of the stars above them. Yeah, and insanely sensitive mirrors, and they've got these special electro-optical kind of like sensors attached to the cameras. So the users, like the battle space controller people, like the guys with the with the boffins with the glasses, they can actually watch everything going overhead, every single satellite, every single chunk of satellite, piece of bolt, something down to the size of a baseball, every meteorite, every little shard of comet ice, whatever. There's just things constantly zipping past at 36,000 k's an hour just over their heads. And every now and again, so every single object is already tagged. So a Cosmos satellite zooms past, it's tagged as, Cosmos 138. Yep. Blah, blah, blah. A piece, some old rocket body from a lunar mission goes past, that's already been tagged. It's number 9864272 US rocket body, whatever. Every now and again, though, just every now and again, something zooms past which no one's ever seen before. And that's when they jump. It's immediately called an uncorrelated target. And that means it's either one of a few things. It's either a piece of meteorite that they've never seen before. That's okay. That's if it's really big, like if it's leaving a big, huge trail on their screen, that's really scary. Because that means it could be heading for Earth's surface, right? Yep. And then all their computers do something called an impact prediction report. They immediately send it to Washington and London and whatever else. Or it's part of the object that zooms overhead will be called an NFL, new foreign launch, which means it's a new missile or rocket that's been launched from North Korea or Iran or Russia or whatever. Yeah. Sometimes some uncorrelated targets, they appear and then they vanish, right? And they're the ones that we're spooked at, because in orbital dynamics, using in Newtonian physics and Kepler's law in space, things just don't vanish in space. Yes, occasionally a meteorite will zip past and go very close to Earth and then nick off back into interplanetary space, but sometimes maybe there's some things that are a little bit more interesting, like what we would call UFO. And these uncorrelated targets, to get hold of the actual data, it is all classified, and it doesn't matter how old it is. I could ask, or I have asked Air Force Space Command's 14th Air Force, it's called the Joint Functional Component Center for Space at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. I can ask them for copies of all uncorrelated data, all uncorrelated target data for, say, 1989. And they will come back and they'll say, all uncorrelated target data, no matter what year you specify, it is all classified secret or above. That means secret or top secret, and we're not releasing a single thing. Not a single thing. Go somewhere else.
So do you think some of this could have been passed off as technical glitches with the system, maybe, that could have been mistaken?
There's actually a term for that. They're called false UCTs. What actually happens is with uncorrelated targets in space, there's actually 4 types. Once they've seen it a couple of times, or once they've got a really good look at it, or once it's appeared, let's say it appears on one of the telescope screens, then it appears on another one on the other side of the world, or once, let's say it appears on the telescope screen in Hawaii, and then it also crosses over the United States and it trips something called the Space Track Fence, which is an ultra-long-range radar from California to Florida.
Yep.
Let's say it's seen on multiple different systems, right?
Yep.
Once they sort of know what they're looking at, like which direction it's going, how high it is, how large it is, they actually tag it as one of 4 things. It's either a critical UCT, that means it's foreign and it's bad and it's nasty and it's probably got cameras on it or it might bomb us. Or 2, it's classified as a significant UCT, which means maybe we've got to keep looking at this thing, it could be bad. Then there's an insignificant UCT, which is probably just some little bolt or nut that's come off a satellite. And then there's something called a false UTC, which is, UCT. A false UCT is a system glitch. It's something that looks like it was there, but it actually wasn't there.
Yeah,
that could be something, even like a piece of ice that's actually melted. By the time they get a second look at it, it's gone forever.
Yeah.
So that's called a false. But yeah, I mean, some of them will be system glitches. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I've actually got booklets. The way these telescopes work, I've got copies of declassified booklets, or I've even got a copy of an instruction manual on how to run these cameras, and it's like 57 pages just to learn how to use the screens.
Oh wow!
And it's really, it's incredible, and that's from the 80s. So imagine what they've got now in 2000.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially from the 80s. Jeez.
Yeah, I know. Well, I found one document the other day that rocked me to the core. There's a huge radar base in Florida. Everyone knows about it. It's been there since the 60s. It's called the Eglin site, or the Eglin facility, or the Eglin radar station. And its job is to look over the Caribbean. So it looks up over the Caribbean, like over Cuba and Bahamas, and it's looking for submarine-launched ballistic missiles. It's looking for intercontinental ballistic missiles, intermediate-range ballistic missiles coming from Eastern Bloc or communist countries, or countries like that have been problematic in the past, like Grenada or, particularly Cuba.
Yeah.
Anyway, it turns out I've got a 1980, what we call, the radar station is run by a squadron called it used to be run by a squadron called the 20th Missile Warning Squadron. And I've got a unit history. Unit history is like a 50-page booklet about what the squadron did for that whole year. So, the number of awards that were given to service, how much money they went through, how much fuel they went through on the base, how much electricity they went through, was there a visiting general, did the president drop by, how much lunches did we eat, whatever.
Wow.
But in there, yeah, I know, in there there's a chapter on, it's called capabilities. And it simply says the Eglin space radar system performed exceeding capabilities. We were able to detect 2 test launches from Cuba's landmass, blah, blah, blah. We also saw 2 Soviet pre-launch events or launch events that were warned to us, no problem. But anyway, it goes on. Then it says, it's got this curious statement. You've got to remember, this is from 1980, right? Yeah. It says, the system is working so well that when we spot things in space, we can judge their size and shape and reflectivity.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they can actually, with the radar system, they can actually discern how radar reflectivity is. So, how it reflects radio waves. So that would tell you if it's made of plastic, metal, whatever. Then it says we can discern its shape and we can discern its size, like how physically big it is, and then if it's a rectangle or a cone or a circle or a sphere. So if they've spotted something like a missile warhead, which of course is shaped like a cone, they can actually discern that, get this, from 3,000 miles out.
That's incredible.
They could do this in 1980 with 1970s technology. Jeez. So can you imagine what they can do now?
Oh, it's mind-blowing just to think that. Their systems, like the computer systems they would have had back in those days, they would have been absolutely massive.
They would have been the clunkiest. They had to do everything with dot matrix printouts. they had to do, apparently I read once that some of these sites, there was another one in Thule, Greenland, it's called the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System base Thule, it's an American base in Greenland, and apparently in the late 70s, every single thing that went over their head, like every satellite, every missile body, every single, like piece of space debris, it became a line on a computer screen, and it was printed out on a dot matrix printer, and these printers just went 24 hours a day non-stop, like that. And so even in the 70s, they were able to discern the height of an object in space or in the upper atmosphere. They were able to discern its rough shape, its radar reflectivity. So now I would expect that they would have data that's much, much, much more accurate. So instead of the computer system saying, it's 1,116 Ks up, I'm thinking now it says it's 1,116.683246 Ks up.
To the microdecimal, basically.
Right to the decimals. Or instead of the computer saying, look, it's got a length of roughly 17 feet and a height of 4 feet, it's probably right down to decimal place, and it will say if it's tumbling or not, or like if it's tumbling, or if it's sort of like stationary, or maybe if it's fading, like if it's actually spinning. So one side, I have actually heard that they can even tell now if an object in space is actually tumbling, and one side is very, very reflective, and the other side is like matte black. They can even watch that in real time. Like they can say, right, we know in 10 seconds it's going to get really reflective again. And they can actually work out what type of light is coming off it. So is it reflected sunlight, or is it reflected moonlight that's actually sunlight bouncing off the moon and stuff like that? Like they can get like kind of spectral analysis of what type of light is coming off it and all this. And then to top it off, they've even got systems in other places around the world where if it is a man-made object and it's broadcasting, like like TV shows or whatever, they can watch all that too.
That's in real incredible. Time. I'm absolutely mind blown.
Yeah, no, true. So if you've got a place, like I know there's a place virtually no one knows about in Feltwell in England, that every time a satellite, it's quite true, every time a satellite goes overhead, if they so wish, and if they had the manpower, and if they could be bothered, they could watch snippets of TV shows constantly. They could listen to classified broadcasts, like let's say an American satellite goes over England, right, that for a split second they could pick up all that nice data. It might be a US Navy weather prediction service satellite, or it could be a backup satellite for submarine transmissions, upload and uplink and downlink submarine transmissions for the Mediterranean fleet of submarines in around Italy or whatever. And so bases on the ground can actually suck in all this eavesdrop, like all this sort of eavesdrop radio signalling and scrambled messages as well. I do believe that in Australia, when an Indonesian satellite goes over Pine Gap, for a split second they can actually watch Indonesian Al Jazeera.
Yeah, okay.
Bit weird, isn't it?
It's sort of making me think, like, if they can do all this with just basic satellites, what are they going to be doing using with the Starlink?
Well, it's going to be. I don't know. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, what we've got now is just so incredible. I mean, what we can watch in space with the right resources is so incredible now and it's not just. It used to be that it's just up to like 600 Ks into space, but now they're able. Now our systems on the ground are able to look up to like 36,000 Ks into space, which is the really high-flying satellites that do things like weather mapping and like telescopes and stuff like that. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely incredible. Like I said, I couldn't stop saying, wow, that's how mind-blown I am. But just how much technology we had back in the 80s there. Like, I don't think people realise how much we could do back then. Yeah, I honestly thought we're still using DOS and still using, little basic stuff.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I've got some papers. There's a ballistic missile early warning base in England at a place called Fylingdales. It's this rugged, wet, muddy place in England. It's in Yorkshire, and it's an American. It's one of the biggest radar systems in the entire world. It's called Ballistic Missile Early Warning System Fylingdales, and it's half run by, it's paid for by the Americans, and it's functional under the US Air Force, but it's actually run by the British Royal Air Force. Anyway, even back in the 60s, even back in like 1969, the computers were, I couldn't believe this, the computers were just advanced enough. So this radar base, it constantly looks, its main job is to look towards the old Eastern Bloc, so Russia, Poland, the Baltic, China, and its job was to look at anything rising up in the atmosphere and coming hurtling back down. In other words, missiles.
Yeah,
it's a frontline detection for World War III intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's what its job is. And it apparently, even in the late 60s, its computers were powerful enough that its radar and the computers behind the radar were able to individually discern and kind of track and predict up to 50 simultaneous objects moving at like 18,000 kilometers an hour.
that's a fair.
So
You've
got this radar system that's just screaming away with, it's using 1 megawatt of power, and it's detecting, say 40 or 50 missiles rising up out of central Russia or central Soviet Union, headed towards England, Scotland, France, or whatever, and it's actually able to automatically track and impact predict the first 50 of them, and that's with 1960s computers.
That's incredible.
Most mathematicians were still using things like abacuses and like old tube-based calculators that were the size of refrigerators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It is quite unreal. It is quite unreal.
How much do you think that like these things would have picked up UFOs back in those days?
Shitloads. We know we've got a few comments from various scientists. I know there's various scientists over the years who have been in the defense industry and the aerospace detection industry and who have actually funded and worked with these sort of facilities, and they've actually accidentally dropped information in congressional hearings and in classified letters to, deputy directors of the CIA and everything. I've seen letters that say things like, I know one particular scientist got up in Congress in 1968. No, sorry, hold on, 69. Yeah, no, it was 1966. And he said, I can't say too much right now because of classification, but I know of a system that is already picking up anomalous events that aren't missiles or aircrafts. But again, I can't say anything. And this is, and his statement was that's basically what he said. Now, what we found out, which was and this goes back to my sort of work where you had to do research. Researchers found out that only that particular scientist, his name's actually just lost on me now, which never happens. But anyway, but hold on, it was at Thornton Page. Yeah, I think it was Thornton Page. We found out that only a week before that, he happened to be in a place called Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. And interestingly, Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado is the backup site of all of America's best missile detection sites. It's the backup, sort of like redundancy backup alternate site for radar, for long-range radar and missile detection capability. So he said that. We've had other comments too, like, who else is that? What else has there been? We've had. I know. Some people might have heard of the American power broker and statesman Henry Kissinger. He famously went to China in 1987, and he was the Secretary of State for a long time. Anyway, he actually wrote a letter to the Deputy Director of Operations for the CIA, and it said something along the lines that America's ballistic missile early warning system was regularly picking up objects that didn't appear to be glitches in the system, but didn't appear to match the profiles of things like planes or missiles, and that they were still trying to work out what these like anomalies were. So that, in a rough sense, could be UFOs too. Like there's all these little things that have been dropped over the years. Like there's other examples that I've got noted deep in various booklets and whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So a lot of effort's gone into this. They're just going to find information that's happened back in the 60s there.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard work.
It would have been very hard work.
Yeah, I do. It can be very boring and so many dead ends. Like you can read entire books and think that it turns out you've either read it all before or it's some way completely irrelevant or So there you go.
Yeah, did you ever come across something that like sort of overlooked it a little bit there and then gone hang on a second, what about this back here? Then going back and look at, there's more information into that. And so I dove back into it.
Many times. There's been times when I've had to. There's been times where I've seen an acronym like a huge acronym. Like it might be, I don't know, AFIGCH whatever, and I think, oh God, I'll go and check that later. And it turns out, and then years later I'll see it again, and I'll think, hold on, I've seen this before, and I'll go and do some research, and I'll find out that it's the old name for like a classified or very highly secure archive within a classified archive at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, or something like that. Or you'll see someone's name. What's really weird is when you have a case where you see, we see, say, 1947, some security, some sort of captain or corporal security guard of an Air Force or an Army base in America, right, reports a UFO to his commanding officer, whatever. And it's just a few lights in the sky, and some of his other, service people around him saw it as well. And they write, they each write a paragraph, and it goes into a dossier, and it's an unsolved sighting report. Nothing particularly confrontational or intrusive to the base, but it's something to maybe look at. Anyway, all of a sudden, you're reading something 20 years later from the Vietnam War.
Yep.
And you think, hold on, I've seen this name before. Can't be the same guy, surely. And it's a really strange name. And you'll think, Christ, he's seen another, and you'll see like a huge sighting report from the Vietnam War. The same guy who's now a colonel, so he's gone up through the ranks, major, lieutenant colonel, he's now a colonel. And he's had the unfortunate situation of having to report another UFO 20 years later. I've seen that and had to do a double take and really do my homework on that. That's quite unusual when that happens.
Yeah, wow, I bet it would have been. Yeah. So basically in Australia, how did you go about when it comes to their sort of defence force or government sort of sightings that have been reported to them? How'd you go about with those ones?
Well, you've got to go back through history. So basically, if you look through history, it's starting in the mid-50s. The agency ultimately responsible for UFOs was the Royal Australian Air Force. I mean, a UFO report, whether it's by a civilian or a cop or a foreign national or a military serviceman, ultimately it could be reported to an observatory, like an astronomical observatory. It could be reported to an airport, occasionally to police, sometimes to the Bureau of Meteorology, sometimes to the Bureau of Air Safety, who handle things like, incidents on planes and incidents when landing and accidents of, aircraft or whatever. Occasionally even UFOs will be reported through embassies. So it might be an Australian engineer in New Zealand. He reports a UFO, but he reports it to Australia's government through our embassy in Auckland or whatever.
Yep.
But ultimately, most reports either simply went into drawers, like folders, and that's it, or they ultimately went to the Royal Australian Air Force. Typically, what would happen if you were quite serious and wanted to report a UFO, people would, you would tend to ring the police or the nearest airport, or maybe you'd ring, the nearest Bureau of Meteorology station or whatever. But ultimately, they would say, look, if you're serious about this, that's fine, but we need you to ring your nearest RAF base, Royal Australian Air Force Base. And ultimately, the actual organisation within the RAF that was responsible for UFOs, that's like collecting reports and then investigating those reports. The organisation was called DAFI, which is Directorate of Air Force Intelligence. And so each RAF base in Australia, I think with the exception of two of some of the really small ones, but almost all RAF bases in Australia had a DAFI officer, or Directorate of Air Force Intelligence officer, or officers plural. And they would, if you were serious about your UFO report, they would take your phone call or take your mail, and they would send you out a 3-page pro forma, like a 3-page essentially form to fill out, and it would have, your name, your date of birth, your address, the location where you thought you saw the UFO, the color of the UFO or UFOs, the number of UFOs, any sound associated with them, the angular width, like how big were they, whatever. It was 3 pages.
Yeah, wow. So that's a pretty serious document.
Yeah, it's called UFO. Yeah, it's called a UFO pro forma. Or back then, it was actually Australia. We didn't actually use the word UFO after about. We actually rarely used the word UFO. Mostly from the 70s onwards, it was actually called an unusual aerial sighting, UAS, unusual aerial sighting. Very occasionally, it was called an unusual aerial phenomena, but mostly UAS. Yep. Anyway, you'd fill it out, and they would receive it, and then they would do an investigation. So they would investigate what planes were in the sky at the time, what planets were visible on the horizon at the time, what sort of weather conditions you would have been experiencing on that day or night. They'd look into sneaky stuff like, were you a repeat UFO witness? Were you the sort of person that was reporting one every night? They would look at satellite prediction services, like what satellites were going overhead. They would write back to you with follow-up questions like about your eyesight, or just to get an absolute clarification of what direction you were actually looking at or whatever.
So they'll delve right into it, like, so they pretty much really get into you to go on every single bit of detail. So that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. That was good. In some cases, if it was near enough, if it was near enough to the base, they would actually send someone. So they would actually send a RAF officer, or RAF officers plural. They would actually send in a staff car. So if the sighting happened right near a RAF base, and it was actually something that could have been a threat to national security, like a surveillance drone, or maybe a meteorite, like a piece of space debris that might have landed right near a military facility, or if it was something that was part of some sort of ongoing pattern that someone higher up had said, look, we really need to get on top of this, even if it's just to quell public fear, they would actually send a RAF officer, particularly in the 50s. In the 50s and 60s, they would regularly send RAF officers, particularly if there was some sort of physical evidence they needed to pick up, like film negatives, if they needed to look at a supposed landing site, take measurements at a landing site, if they felt that if they felt something they could solve, like let's say someone kept reporting that every Wednesday night there was a UFO on the mountain. Every Wednesday night there was a UFO on the mountain. Finally, the RAF have had enough. They say, right, we're going to get on top of this. We're going to go after this bloody mountain. Right, and they might go up there and find that there's someone who's using floodlights every night at that exact time because they're deer hunting, whatever. So that sort of thing. But sometimes, and look, more often than not, the RAF officers did make some attempt. Look, a lot of the cases were obviously, they were so loose with, they were so poorly reported, that the witness didn't know the date or the time, or they couldn't really decide if the UFO was white or if it was silver or whatever. So a lot of those cases would be pushed to the back of the queue. But sometimes they would get some really good cases. Now, to answer your question, what have I found more recently? Something that is really important, I feel, it's that the Royal Australian Air Force closed up its UFO shop in 1994. They found that it was costing too much. It wasn't getting anywhere. They were constantly being charged with allegations of covering up. They were just not getting any scientific merit out of it, and they weren't trying to. They decided, look, this is someone else's problem. Maybe the CSIRO can take it over. Maybe the police can deal with it. Who knows? The airports, but we're not doing it anymore. They said we've been doing it for 40 years. The actual guy who closed the program down was a Group Captain Brett Bennington, and he recommended to the Chief of Air Staff that the UFO sightings collection program be basically shut down. He did leave one little caveat. If someone honestly thinks that they see something that could be something like a burning aircraft, like an aircraft in distress, or a piece of space debris that's landed somewhere and it might be of great technical value to Australian scientists, then they would begrudgingly hear you out if you really wanted to write them a letter. But basically, they were not investigating UFOs anymore. Go somewhere else.
Yep.
So
that's fair enough.
However, that most of them, So, however, at around about the same time is when Australia's long-range radar systems got really, really good. And Australia's got a number of awesome radar systems. One of them is what we call Jindalee, the Jindalee Over the Horizon Radar Network, and it's run by a squadron called 1RSU. Another radar system or a group of radar systems we've got are these semi-mobile radar systems that are on the back of trucks, and they're run by a squadron called 3 Crew, or 3 Control and Reporting Unit. And yet another series of radar stations or radar systems that we've got are the ones that are at all the Air Force bases. So they're run by 44 Wing, or Royal Australian Air Force 44 Wing. They're the big radar towers at Townsville, Katherine, Darwin, Pearce, etc.
Yep.
Now, those places, so 1RSU, Jindalee, 3 Crew mobile radar units, and 44 Wing air traffic control services, they all pick up things in Australia's airspace and north of Australia. So they pick up planes, like just normal Qantas planes, Singapore Airlines planes, whatever. They pick up helicopters up there. They see Indonesian aircraft. They see the occasional drug runner from Papua New Guinea or whatever. They see the occasional illegal flight, like a stolen aircraft or an aircraft that's landing somewhere else than it said it would. They may see the occasional missile. If their radars are really, really lucky, they may even pick up an incoming meteorite.
Yep.
Now, every now and again, though, and I've got the actual paperwork, I actually got it out of the government under powerful Freedom of Information Act laws, they pick up something called contact of interest, COI. Okay. The contact of interest is something that is on their screens for long enough that it's not just spurious. Like, it's not like a flock of extremely dense seagulls. It's not like a really bizarre weather pattern. It's whatever. It's something that's got to be actually with purpose. It's flying at it's flying at a consistent speed. It's got some radar reflectivity. It certainly looks like an aircraft, but it's got no flight plan. It's got no radio transmission. They ask it to land. They say, like the battle space controllers will see this blip on their screen and they'll say, right, that's contact of interest. Wow, what's he doing up there? Geez, he's got no flight plan. He's got no radio transmission. He's not in a mayday situation. We better talk to him. So they'll say, right, aircraft in sector 204, whatever. Can you identify yourself? Then nothing happens. And let's say it starts doing loop-de-loops, or it goes up in height or down in height, or it disappears and reappears somewhere else, then you've got a real serious problem.
Yeah.
And that is called a contact of interest. And what happens is they record as much data as possible. They record where they first saw it, like where it appeared on their screens first, where it disappeared, or like 5 minutes later it disappears. They record that. They record like the actual path it took over Australia's airspace. They look at the actual strength of the return, like how big was this object? Was it really highly reflective? Did it have as much as radar return as say a huge jumbo jet, or was it something quite clearly very small? They look at whether it performed any really bizarre movements, whether it was at ridiculously high altitudes, that sort of thing. And the battle space controllers at the Jindalee Centre, or wherever, at the air traffic control towers, whatever, they will actually do a drawing. It's called a contact of interest pictogram. They'll actually do a drawing. It's a map of where it appeared, what it did in the sky, and where it disappeared. And then they'll also take a recording of what was on their screens, like an actual digital MP3 recording. Okay. And they'll send it up the chain of command. And that's cool. And it gets put into something called the contact of interest database. And that is where I suspect some of Australia's best UFO cases are. I've actually successfully had portions of that database released. And I've got it on my website. Like, I've actually got it. It literally looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It's really weird. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet with days of contacts of interest. I've reported, it shows the latitude and longitude where the object first appeared, the site that actually picked it up, like was it Townsville RAF base, or was it, like Jindalee system in Alice Springs or whatever. Then it's got, was anyone briefed on the matter urgently, the date when it happened, all this. They would only release certain information. Many of the columns of these Excel spreadsheet type pages they've just blacked out under national security exemptions. So that is where you've got our best billion-dollar radar systems have picked up objects that are solid enough in the sky, but we have no idea what they are.
Yeah, wow. So how long do you think we've had these radar systems for in Australia?
So all the RAF bases have always had long range primary radar. So originally they had right back in the 70s, all our Air Force bases had radars that were Italian radars, are very good, and now they've got, I believe, Raytheon radars, which are made by like French and British. And we've probably got software that's made by, it's interoperable with American systems. We've had them for a very long time now. Jindalee Over the Horizon radar network, that's quite new. And when I say new, it came online, I think, in 1996, but it had very limited coverage. Then it's had upgrade after upgrade after upgrade, and now it can see down on huge parts of like Indonesia and Andaman Sea and East Timor, Cape York, Gulf of Carpentaria, whatever. So Jindalee's been around now for probably 28 years, but it's only gotten really good in the last 12 years. Now, the pre-crew radars are the semi-mobile. Like, they're the ones we cut off to Afghanistan, Timor, and Iraq and stuff like that. They've been around. Mobile radar systems have been around and gotten better. It was like the ones in the 80s, the new Doppler digital ones in the 80s were always very good. So they'll only be better and better and better than that. There's another possible location or another possible data set for what we would call UFOs that I've never tackled because I know I won't get anywhere because it'll be very highly classified. But Australia's Air Force has airborne early warning aircraft, like AWACS aircraft, and they can look out in every direction with cameras and radar systems and infrared technology. They can look out, for hundreds of kilometres in a panoramic view. And they can look at everything that's up in the sky: weather cells, planes, missiles, nothing, and that data. Like, well, let's say an AWACS aircraft is flying off the coast of Indonesia, and it picks up a couple of Indonesian fighter jets below it. That's sort of normal. But it also picks up something else up in there, and they zoom in on it, and it's something that looks really weird. And they get some bearings and azimuth data on it, and they get some close-in photographs. That's the sort of material that would be housed. That would be actually housed. We know the wing that the organisation within the Air Force that runs the AWACS system. It's 42 wing, and they're based in. They're either based at Edinburgh in South Australia, or they're based in Williamstown in New South Wales. Either way, that data I know for a fact is classified top secret.
Yeah,
we're not getting that.
Yeah, sort of hoping that we might have had some sort of coverage there from the Westall sort of incident. But unfortunately, you're saying that, that happened in the 60s. Unfortunately, you're saying radars happened in the 70s there. So
no, the problem is Westall, for starters, Tullamarine Airport wasn't even built. Tullamarine Airport was only a few months away from being finished, I think. Tullamarine Airport, like Melbourne's biggest radar station, Melbourne's biggest radar system as always, originally in the 60s, was at Essendon Airport, and then a much bigger system was implemented at Tullamarine Airport. The problem is with radar doesn't look out across the landscape, because then it would pick up every tree and every mountain and every truck and every building. Yeah. The problem in the Westall event was a very low altitude, or pretty low altitude. It's not built. Radar does not. Well, there is one type of radar on ships that will look out sideways because they're looking for submarine periscopes and very low-flying helicopters and stuff, but we're not talking about that. Yep. Like ground-based radars in cities look up, and I don't mean literally up only. They look up, sort of east, west, south, north, but they don't look across the landscape. So for something like, it's so long ago now that there's no way that if the Westall event had happened a little bit nearer a major airport and in today's day and age when you can store everything digitally, like all digital radar data, maybe. But, so there you go.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So going on like the years of research that you've done, like what do you think could have been the greatest document that you've uncovered that sort of just blew your mind?
God. there's this one document. It sounds very dry, but its implications to me are unbelievable. It's called the Bollinger Memo. It's so back in 1969, the United States Air Force and the University of, to cut a long story short, the U.S. Air Force and the University of Colorado joined forces to basically debunk UFOs. And one of their, and they did a pretty good job of it. They certainly did scientifically, they did a very poor job of it. Real scientists laugh at it's called the Condon Report, came out in 1969. In scientific circles, it's laughable. It's really poorly done. It's even poorly written. But for the public and the media, it was a whitewash. Like, it was a fairly successful 1,000-page report. Is literally 1,000 pages. In one version of it is 1,000.
Oh, wow.
1,000. Yeah, it's 1,011 pages in one version. Depending on how they index it and the front covers and stuff, it's massive. And they basically, the Condon Report, Condon and his 16 scientists and Colonel Hitler at the US Air Force headquarters in Washington, D.C., basically debunked UFOs. They basically said, they made a bunch of key findings. They said, number one, UFOs, whatever they are and whatever they're probably not, they do not affect national security, right? And number two, we don't like, as an Air Force, and in fact as the whole military, that includes the Navy and the Army as well, we don't want to spend any more time focusing on UFO reports. We don't want to investigate UFO reports. We don't want to store them. Even if they come from within the military, they are very, very vague about it, but they effectively say there is no place for UFO, for proper, I mean, not stray aircraft and stuff, that's different, but for real UFO reports, there is no place within the US military, particularly the US Air Force. There is no place in the US Air Force or the wider US Department of Defense for UFO reporting or investigation. That's number one. And number two, UFOs do not affect national security. Right.
Yep.
So that was the public findings. That's what the Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Robert Siemens, and Condon and his merry team told the world. However, at the same time, so that's the unclassified version of reality. Now I'll tell you what the classified version of reality said. At the same time as this disgrace was being penned to the American people, there was a secret study done by a chap who was a brigadier general. That's a one-star general. That's quite highly ranked, right? His name was Carroll H. Bollinger, or Carrot Herbert Bollinger, and he was the Deputy Director for Development within the Deputy Chief of Staff for Research and Development Office of the United States Air Force, headquartered at the Pentagon. And he wrote this 3-page memo that was classified secret. I think it was classified secret. It didn't come out until 10 years later. It came out it would never have come out if it wasn't for the work of a chap called Robert Todd, who was an FOI researcher. He does what I do. He harasses government agencies for documents. He basically, in 1978, 79, thereabouts, he wrote to the Air Force and said, I want all documents at your end of the job that helped close down America's UFO reporting system, basically. And he gets this 3-page memo back, and it's called the Bollinger Memo. The actual real word would be the Bollinger Air Staff Study of UFOs. Anyway, on page 2, right there in black and white, not once but twice, it actually says, in future, UFO reports that affect national security will be handled in accordance with something called JNAP 146 and Air Force Manual 5511. So that's saying something absolutely extraordinary. It's saying, so on the one hand, we've had the Air Force public relations people and the information people and the Condon Commission, we've had them telling the world UFOs are not a threat to national security at all, and there should be no one in the military that is bothered with them at all anymore. There will be no more reporting of UFOs. There will be no more standardized reporting of UFOs, blah, blah, blah. And yet, in the same year, Carroll H. Bollinger, the Brigadier General, is writing a memo to the rest of the Air Force saying that behind closed doors, any, and I quote, UFOs that affect national security will be handled in accordance with JNAP 146 and Air Force Manual 5511. Now, JNAP 146 is a particular booklet that tells people how to report UFOs, and Air Force Manual 5511 is another booklet that tells military people how to report anything highly unusual or troubling to the military.
Yeah, wow. So basically just totally contradicting themselves.
It is absolutely unbelievable. It is literally a 180-degree turn. It's like the public. It is so obvious. The public were told by Condon and Dr. Robert Siemens, the Secretary of the Air Force, and the information people, and was told, like, so scientists who were on the Air Force books and the Air Force itself were telling Congress and the American public that UFOs, one, are no national security threat, and two, we're not interested anymore. And then, but behind closed doors, they're completely 180-degree different, totally different. It specifically says UFOs in future that affect national security will be handled like this by us. It's all, and it all went underground. It all went underground. But they called it the back channel. There was these two back channels, JNAP 146 and Air Force Manual 5511. They were the two new back. Well, actually, it weren't that new. Those actual booklets have been in place for years. But the point is now Brigadier Belinda was actually highlighting to the wider military, from now on, you report UFOs like this, we do it classified, we don't tell the people. If it affects national security, report it like this, and we're going to do it our way from now on. There will be no public involvement. There will be no involvement from Congress. Senators will not be answering any or asking any more questions. We are not taking questions from the public. We are not making findings public. We are not advertising that we're still in the UFO game. We're not taking reports from civilians. Blah 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 blah. It is the biggest. If people say to me, when people say to me, oh, like, give me an example of some real cover up. That's one example I could give you. That's really quite troubling. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you can't get any more. When you've got a situation where one hand is telling the world this and the other hand, for eyes only, behind closed doors, is telling you something that's literally the exact opposite, right? Who are you going to believe?
Yeah, that's right.
Like, it's quite obvious that there's a problem. So that's quite an impressive document.
Yeah.
I'll send you the Belinda memo. It's top heavy. It's not easy to read. But when Robert Todd saw it, when he got it, when he actually had the Air Force actually release it, he was speechless. He was furious. Yeah. Because we've been told, people were really believing all this stuff, but as the years went on in the 70s, researchers like people like me, but just the generation before me, started realising that that so much of what we'd been told was just simply for just general consumption. It wasn't actually based on much truth. Yeah. Shocking.
Wow. So just talking about researchers in the past and present and whatever. So if you think people wanted to become a researcher, or like where or how do you recommend for them to go start their road to hopeful success?
Easy. Okay, get off YouTube for starters. Read. Unfortunately, it sounds very dry and boring, but read books. And look, I could give anyone the list of, I've got like a list of my 10 best books, my 20 best books. These are books that, one, have stood the test of time, two, haven't been easily superseded in their information, three, have not been involved in scandals, like the author hasn't been involved with scandals of plagiarism and whatever else, like books that have really stood up. And sometimes you have to read skeptical material too. In fact, in my list of best 20 books, there's two in there that are by skeptics. One's by Phil Klass and the other one's by Donald Menzel, who are UFO skeptics, and they do have some extremely sobering, pointed arguments, and they were able to trash some excellent UFO cases, and they were scientists, particularly Donald Menzel. So I would say read. That I've got a list of, say, top 20 books or top 50 books that should be what we call required reading for ufologists, for UFO researchers. They need to be required reading.
Yeah.
People should learn about what is actually in the sky. Everyone said, planes, helicopters, what else is there? Well, there actually is a lot. There's lenticular clouds that look like UFOs. There is, now obviously we've got drones. There's still to this day, some weather and meteorology bodies in some countries still release weather balloons, right? There is a number of objects that in the sky that look pretty weird. Aerial refueling aircraft in layers of pollution look really bizarre. Some combinations of stars just coming up on the horizon. You need to know a bit about astronomy. You can't. Yeah,
the list goes on.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically, it's just the rule of thumb of ruling out all logical explanations and then hopefully coming down to something that you can't think of.
Yeah, it's called IFO filtering, so identified flying object filtering. Once you filter out all the junk, like you filter out, obviously, if you can, you've got to filter out hoaxes and hallucinations.
Yeah.
Then you start filtering out aircraft and astronomical bodies. If it's a daylight sighting, like in broad daylight, well, obviously that's easy. You can filter out stars and planets.
Yeah.
If it's a sighting in the middle of the night, you know, like if it's, well, there's heaps of things you can do. One of the first things I do for nighttime sightings is I look, and unless the object is clearly really close to someone, one of the first things I do is look to see what satellites were passing overhead. Yep. And if they say we definitely saw a UFO going from north to south at exactly 8:53, we'll go, hold on, the Iridium satellite 3 model for Europe goes right over at that moment, you know, like, and you'll be able to do a lot of work. You know, you can get on these flight prediction services or flight reference services to look to see what planes were in the sky at any one time, and you can go back for a month's worth of data. Like I could see, you know, planes are in the sky, say at the end of May, even now over any particular given area.
Yeah.
Even police choppers and everything. So there is a lot you can do.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, a lot of people just want to go and jump to it's got to be UFO craft because, like, you know, because it's unidentified. But it's like, well, hang on, do the homework first. Try and rule it out instead of just going calling the alien card.
Yeah. It's really frustrating. It's very frustrating. We've had cases where it's often a combination of things. So something like the moon rising on the horizon, but through a layer of clouds, or a plane deciding to fly very, very low, but in a really horrendous layer of pollution, like over an industrial area, like over a whole city, you can see it.
Yep.
Or something like. It might be a combination of meteorological things and actual objects in the sky. Like I know police helicopters have caused sightings that look provocative at face value.
Yeah.
You know, because helicopters, even though they're loud, when they're far away and the wind's blowing completely away from you towards them, so sound waves much harder to get back to you. Some police helicopter activity at night with their floodlights, particularly when they're quite low, and if you can't hear them, all of a sudden it takes on a completely different meaning.
Because I think, like, especially there in Victoria or Melbourne area in general, like, people will say that's like the hot spot for UFOs, but like, if you're in a high spot, you can see nearly the entire city range of Melbourne. And people are seeing objects in the distance. They go, "Oh, it's going to be a UFO," and it's like, well, it could be as simple as a police helicopter, or like you're saying, or a plane in the distance, or something, you know, something explainable.
Yeah, a late landing plane. I mean, people say, "Oh, but Telemarine aircraft stops accepting planes at a certain time." Well, no, it doesn't. It accepts cargo flights after a certain time, and it does accept passenger flights after a certain time. It's just that they get fined for it. So, there's heaps of it's quite complicated.
It's unfortunate how people make these mistakes, but it's, I suppose, like, we have to get aware of things that are in the sky now. Technology is a big thing now. It's not like the 80s or 90s where drones weren't a thing then, you know, and a lot of mistaken identities, really. That's what I found with this page going through. You know, Kira's got a camera now and they're misidentifying a lens flare and stuff like that. It's like,
lens flares are a big one. People think because cameras are getting better, no, how it works is cameras are getting better with colour and they're getting better with short range stuff. Go outside. I challenge people to go outside, look up at an aircraft going from like Auckland to Perth, right? So it's at 31,000 feet.
Yep.
Right. Zoom in on it all you want. Get the best phone camera you can. Zoom in on it all you want. You will not be able to discern. It will be so hard to discern individual features on that. It will still look like because it's moving fast and you're moving as well. Like your hands are moving and it's moving and it's windy and, you know, the sunlight reflecting in a certain way that you might not be quite aware of. And then there's the software makes like they have these
adjustments and stuff
adjustments.
like that,
They build in colours that aren't actually there and stuff like this. And I actually read one paper. I haven't really absorbed it because it's very technical, but it's actually saying it's by a really renowned UFO researcher, and he's basically really dismayed at basically using mathematics. He proves that phone cameras have an enormous long way. We're talking 20 years before they get that good. He said that he's basically writing they are literally just never and not good enough. Like film cameras in some way, because film cameras, like the actual image is actually literally ingrained somewhere that you can just go deeper and deeper with microscope, with a magnifying glass and whatever. With digital cameras, you're effectively getting like an electronic artifact. Like you're actually not getting a truly accurate image of it. You actually getting something that's passed through layers and layers of software.
That's right. Pixelation and stuff like that comes into effect.
So I mean, our cameras do amazing things. Like they put, the software can put, they're just ridiculous. Put pandas on people's faces, and you can spin it around and grayscale and stuff like that. But as far as taking a photo of something that's 26 kilometers away in a thunderstorm, it ain't very good.
No, it's you're pretty much shooting at a brick wall and not being able to get through it.
Yeah.
So, a question for you. All right, so we're basically going to go towards also got a bit of a disclosure, if you want to call it that. I don't really think it's much of a disclosure, but, a bit of a cryptic disclosure, if anything. So do you think we'll get any information or footage like we recently had released from America from Australia's perspective?
No. I think it'd be pretty unlikely. If you're talking about footage taken from, say, like Australia's got FA-18 Hornets F-18 Hornets and FA-18 Super Hornets, and we've got those AWACS aircraft and various transport planes and so on. I would actually be curious to know, and I've asked around occasionally. I just don't know what cameras, not maybe personal cameras, but what sort of actual photographic equipment pilots and navigators and weapons officers are actually taking up there with them.
Yep.
That's number one. So obviously to get pictures or moving images, you've got to take equipment up with you. Now, as far as military equipment, so that means forward-looking infrared cameras, electro-optical systems that they look for things like heat plumes, or they look for, say, they look for sort of like they hone in on weapons systems and then take automatic pictures whether the pilot even knows about it and stuff like that. Have we taken really extraordinary pictures? Look, I don't even see. I have not. It's been a long time since I've even seen pictures of where an Australian pilot or an Australian seaman in the ocean, or a captain or a navigator or whatever, has taken, say, intelligence or security photographs or moving images of, say, an Indonesian fighter jet or an Indonesian. I mean, the closest thing I know is when our Navy takes photographs of people smuggling boats or drift like empty boats that are just drifting in the sea for backup intelligence. Where's it from? Have they all drowned? Whatever. That's the closest thing I can think of to where, certainly in our northern approaches in Northern Territory, WA, Queensland, where anyone's taking photographs out essentially on what could be the battlefield or out in forward operational areas. Are our pilots taking photographs of stuff in the sky regularly? Are they allowed? Do they even know that they're doing it? Like I said, some systems apparently take photographs automatically and the pilots don't even realise. Yeah. And they're instantaneously uplinked to satellites and sent straight back down to a fusion headquarters in Glenbrook or maybe Alice Springs or whatever. Are we going to get anything? I would doubt it. I would very much doubt it. I think it would be a fluke. I think it would be like a one-off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, so just a quick question in regards to that. So, like, if, say, someone did want to try and track down information from the military, like, who is our military sort of personnel to try and ask in that regard? Like, how America's got the FBI and the CIA or whatever and whatnot. Who's the Australian sort of things?
Royal Australian Air Force, but particularly the organisations or actual officers, the director of the Directorate of Coordination for the Royal Australian Air Force. That's one. Another one would be the Defence Flight Safety Bureau, or has it changed its name? It used to be called the Directorate of Defence Aviation and Air Force Safety, but now it's just recently changed its name to, I think it's called the Directorate of Flight Services or the Directorate of Flight Safety Bureau or something. It's just very recent. I'm going to have to check that out, but that's another one. Another one would be the Australian Transport Safety Bureau's, which is not military, but it's civilian, but the Australian Transport Safety Bureau's accident and incident notification people in Canberra. And another one would be the Air Services Australia electronically submitted event report analysts. Another one would be anyone operating the radar systems on the Anzac class frigates that are run by the Royal Australian Navy's Naval Command. That would be another one. Oh, I might have to go soon.
Yep.
Yeah, so that they would be the organiser. Oh, and then another one for, like, if you're talking about actual sightings, like video footage and actual descriptive sightings, this won't work. But 41 Wing, like I was saying before, 41 Wing will run one RSU radar system Jindalee, and they run the three crews, the three reporting and control and reporting units. Sorry, and they log atmospheric and aerospace detections of what I was saying before about contacts of interest. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, before we let you go, mate, I've got another question here. Not a question, but well, actually, it is a question. Actually, if people want to find the research that you've done in the past, where could they find it? I believe you have a website.
Yeah. So it's called, I think if you just type in, I suppose 4 words, UFOs space documenting space the space evidence. So UFOs documenting the evidence, and I suppose you could put Paul Dean next to it. That would be, because it's a blog site. It's called UFOs Documenting the Evidence. I don't know the exact URL. I'm not good with that stuff. But crap. But that would be that is where the vast bulk of my work is.
Yep, cool. So any particular researchers or anything like that you worked with there, you want to give a bit of a shout out or a bit of a small rundown at least?
Keith Basterfield is the person in Australia I work most with, and he's very, very good, very level-headed, very sensible. His work is very, very reliable. If you want an accurate picture of what's gone on in Australian ufology since day dot, his work is very good. Another one who's very, very good with Australian UFO history is Bill Chalker. He's in Sydney. Overseas, I work heavily with Barry Greenwood. Barry is in Boston, in Massachusetts, and he actually has the largest personal collection of UFO material in the world. Oh, wow. So government documents, magazines, books. He has 3 rooms completely full to the ceilings. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of case files, like actual UFO files, like actual case reports. You know, I mean, he's got 18 folders just on Roswell alone. And, you know, he has, when I talk on Skype with him, he pans the camera around, and the amount of material just in that room alone is so unbelievable. It's literally packed to the ceiling. Absolutely packed to the ceiling. He said it's even up and down the hallway now.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's bad. And he's scanning it. And I think he estimated, this is a few years ago, he estimated that scanning for 8 hours a day, he'll be scanning for 22 years.
Oh.
Yep, that's how much he's got. And then he's got a mate called Dan Aldrich, who's nearly as bad. There is a lot of material out there. That's what I was saying before.
That's incredible.
And you got no idea.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone really does. Really, even the biggest researchers in the world, they probably have no idea either. It's an endless can of worms.
Yeah. So anyway,
no, mate, that's absolutely awesome, mate. Thank you very much for joining us, mate. That's incredible. Right. And I hope people get a better understanding of how much effort's put in behind researching UFOs, and that
it is worth doing. Even if you just pick one area or one country or one place, it's absolutely worth doing.
Yeah, especially when you get a big breakthrough anyway.
Yeah, it is good.
It's very rewarding.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
No, mate, thank you very much for joining us, mate. It's been an absolutely incredible interview having you, and hope to talk to you soon.
That's all right. Yeah, we'll do it again.
Definitely, mate. Look forward to it, mate. All the best.
See ya. Bye.
See you, mate.